The sun burns down on the wilderness of Hazeroth, just days after the long march from Mount Sinai. A woman walks alone toward the outer boundary line of the Israelite camp. She is not a thief, and she is not a pagan captive. She is the prophetess who stood by the reeds of the Nile to protect a baby in a basket. She is the blood sister of the high priest. Yet today, she is being escorted past the final row of tents. Her skin suddenly turned to the color of crushed, dead bone. Picture it. Over 1 million people watch in total silence. As the matriarch of the Exodus is cast out into the wasteland, she is shut out, cut off from the sanctuary. The book of Micah later records God declaring, "I sent before thee Moses, Aaron, and Miriam." She was a structural pillar of the nation. Why is Miriam alone struck with a flesh-eating curse and exiled into the deadly desert for a rebellion she committed alongside her brother, while Aaron remains entirely untouched? The answer is buried in a jarring, unexpected dispute that erupts in the opening lines of Numbers chapter 12. The King James Version anchors the fracture like this: "And Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman." Stop right there. Read that again. 2 siblings attack the chosen lawgiver. The text is explicit that both of them spoke against him. Both of them challenged his supreme authority. But only one of them is dragged outside the camp. Same tent, same rebellion. 2 completely different judgments. To understand the terror of this moment, we have to pull back the layers of history. There is an ancient Aramaic paraphrase of the Hebrew Bible called Targum Pseudo-Jonathan. It was preserved by the early rabbis to capture the deeper, older context of the Torah. And Targum Pseudo-Jonathan holds a terrifying memory of this exact confrontation. I offer it as that, one tradition's record. It reveals that the cloud of God's glory did not merely scold the siblings. It violently withdrew its protection, leaving Miriam instantly consumed by the leprous scale. See the scene. The cloud lifts, and the heroine of Egypt is standing there, half dead in her own flesh. The boundary line waits for her. That boundary was not just a geographic marker drawn in the sand. It was the absolute division between the life-giving presence of God and the chaotic realm of death. To be pushed across it was to be unmade. But before we can investigate the severe asymmetry of this judgment, we have to look at the trigger. The verse introduces a piece of Moses' life that seems to drop out of thin air: an Ethiopian woman. This singular, unnamed figure steps into the biblical narrative for one flashing moment, and her sudden presence is enough to rip the leadership of Israel apart. We have known Moses' wife as Zipporah the Midianite. Now, suddenly, an African bride is standing at the center of the camp. Sit with that. One sudden marriage triggers a catastrophic division among the 3 leaders of the Exodus. But the historical record of this Ethiopian wife is not as silent as the canonical text suggests. Where did Moses find a bride from the deep south of the ancient world? Numbers 12:1 repeats the exact same phrase twice in a single breath. The author of the text refuses to let you look away from her. And Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. Stop right there. The King James translators use the word Ethiopian, but turn the English back into the Hebrew it was translated from, and the word is Cushi, a Cushite. Cush was the ancient biblical name for the region south of Egypt, stretching down through modern-day Sudan and Ethiopia. A land of deep African royalty, dark-skinned warriors, and immense wealth. This is a profound historical collision. Up until this chapter, the book of Exodus only ever named one wife for Moses, Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, a priest from the desert of Midian. Midian sits on the Arabian Peninsula. Cush sits deep in Africa. Two completely different regions. Two completely different bloodlines. Two completely different women. Read that again. The text does not say they spoke against him because of his Midianite wife. Zipporah had already been accepted into the camp. Exodus 18 tells us she was brought to Moses in the wilderness by her father, and Aaron and the elders of Israel sat down to eat bread with them. She was known. She was settled. This Cushite woman is someone else. Her sudden presence in the narrative is a shock to the system of the camp. Picture it, 1 million Israelites, freshly liberated from Egyptian slavery, fiercely tribal, fiercely insular. And here, walking at the side of their supreme leader, is a woman from the African south. We are not told if Moses married her, right there in the wilderness of Hazeroth, or if she was a secret from his past, who emerged from the mixed multitude that came out of Egypt. But her arrival shatters the power dynamic of the ruling family. Watch what the text does. It places this Cushite woman at the exact center of a political and spiritual earthquake. Miriam and Aaron are the older siblings. They protected Moses when he was an infant. They served as his prophets and priests to the people. But now, this new wife threatens their inner circle. The text practically vibrates with their jealousy, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. They weaponize her origin. They use her to strike at his authority. But a massive historical gap remains. The canonical Torah never tells us when or how Moses acquired a Cushite bride. Between his flight from Egypt at age 40 and his return at age 80, the Bible only explicitly records his time shepherding flocks in Midian. Yet the Hebrew word Cushi is sitting right there in Numbers 12, demanding an explanation. If he did not meet her in Midian, and he did not meet her at Sinai, where did she come from? There are older records that claim those 40 missing years were not spent entirely in the tents of Midian. I offer these ancient writings as a window, not as the final word, but they hold a memory of a lost war. One Hebrew word has cracked open a timeline we thought we knew. The canonical text gives us the Cushite woman, but to find out where Moses met her, we have to look at the ancient histories the early church and the rabbis kept alive. How does a Hebrew fugitive end up married to African royalty? There is a massive silence in the book of Exodus. 40 years pass between the day Moses buries an Egyptian in the sand and the day he stands barefoot before the burning bush. We assume he spent every one of those days watching sheep in the deserts of Midian. But Stephen, speaking in the New Testament in Acts chapter 7, drops a massive clue about Moses' life before his exile. The King James records it carefully. And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and was mighty in words and in deeds. Mighty in deeds. Stop right there. The biblical text implies he was not just a pampered prince, but a man of action, a commander. There is an ancient Jewish history that fills this silence. Flavius Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews, a first-century record, preserves a startling tradition about those early years. Josephus records that before Moses ever fled to Midian, the Ethiopians invaded Egypt. In desperation, the Pharaoh placed Moses in command of the Egyptian army. Moses drove the invaders back deep into the south, laying siege to the royal, impenetrable city of Saba in Cush. See the scene. He is not a shepherd holding a wooden staff. He is a general holding a sword, leading an army through serpent-infested deserts to conquer the south. During the siege, Josephus writes that the daughter of the Ethiopian king looked over the city wall, saw the brilliance of the Hebrew commander, and offered to surrender the city if he would take her as his bride. Her name was Tharbus. Another ancient text, the Book of Jasher, holds a parallel memory. It records that Moses actually fled to Cush directly after his exile from Egypt, became a military hero there, and reigned as king over the Cushites for 40 years before finally moving to Midian. In Jasher's account, he is given a Cushite royal widow as a wife. I hold this as their telling, not as proven fact. But the overlap is impossible to ignore. Two distinct ancient Jewish traditions remember the exact same lost chapter. Before the burning bush, before the 10 plagues, Moses was a conqueror in Africa, and he acquired a Cushite bride. Now, carry that ancient memory back into the canonical text of Numbers 12. Picture it. The camp at Hazeroth, the blistering dust of the Sinai Peninsula. This is not a sudden, random marriage to a nomad. If the ancient histories are right, the woman standing next to Moses is a remnant of his royal, military past. She is African royalty. She is a physical reminder that Moses possessed worldly power and foreign alliances. Long before Aaron and Miriam ever became his co-leaders in the wilderness, she represents a Moses they did not raise, a Moses they do not control. Miriam was the heroine of the Nile. She watched over the basket. But this Cushite woman holds a history with Moses that predates the Exodus entirely. The jealousy makes perfect, terrifying sense. The siblings weaponize the Cushite woman's foreign bloodline. They use her as the wedge to strike at his absolute authority. But that brings us to the true danger of the rebellion. The English text says Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses. We read that as a joint attack, an equal partnership of betrayal. But the canonical Hebrew text hides a profound grammatical secret in the very first word of the chapter. Who actually threw the stone? Unroll the scroll of the Hebrew Torah and drag your finger to the very first word of Numbers chapter 12. The King James Version reads plainly, "And Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses." Stop right there. In English, the verb spake is completely neutral. It covers them both equally. It creates the illusion of a unified front, two siblings marching into the tent side by side to confront their younger brother. But turn the English back into the ancient Hebrew it was written in. Watch what the text does. The Hebrew word used here is tedaber. It is a third-person feminine singular verb. Read that again. Feminine. Singular. The text literally translates as, "She spoke, Miriam, and Aaron against Moses." Aaron is not the architect of this treason. He is the accessory. He is swept up in the wake of his older sister's fury. Miriam initiated the strike. Miriam engineered the accusation. Miriam threw the stone. Aaron is the high priest, but he has a horrific track record of folding under pressure. When the mob surrounded him at Sinai, he built a golden calf. Now, his older sister corners him, and he folds again. Same priest, same weakness. This singular Hebrew verb reveals exactly why the boundary line is waiting for her. But the Cushite woman is only the bait. The moment Miriam starts speaking, her true motive bleeds through the text. The King James records the real venom in verse 2. "And they said, Hath the Lord indeed spoken only by Moses? Hath he not spoken also by us?" Sit with that. The African bride disappears from the argument instantly. She was never the point. She was just the wedge Miriam used to pry open a conversation about power. Miriam was the first prophetess of the nation. She held that title at the shores of the Red Sea in Exodus 15. Leading the women in the song of deliverance with a timbrel in her hand, she watched over Moses when he was a helpless infant floating in the reeds. She negotiated with Pharaoh's daughter to hire their own mother as his nurse. She feels she made him. And now, this younger brother is operating on a level of divine authority that completely excludes her. She does not want him overthrown. She wants equal shares of the mountain. She wants a trinity of power. But the end of verse 2 contains 5 of the most terrifying words in the entire wilderness wanderings. And the Lord heard it. Picture it, a private family dispute, a hushed, bitter argument inside a goat hair tent. The million people outside in the blistering sun have no idea the leadership fracturing. Miriam thinks she is just having a political conversation with her brothers. But the atmosphere in the room suddenly changes. The air grows incredibly heavy. God does not send a human messenger to address this rebellion. He does not send an angel to mediate the family dispute. He comes down himself. The argument inside the tent is finished, but the sky above the camp is already shifting. A massive, localized shadow falls directly over the courtyard of the sanctuary. What happens to a prophetess when the God she invoked actually comes down to answer her? The heat of the Hazeroth desert is broken by a voice that shatters the argument in the tent. There is no warning. There is no intermediary. Numbers 12-4 captures the shock in the King James Version. And the Lord spake suddenly unto Moses, and unto Aaron, and unto Miriam, Come out ye three unto the tabernacle of the congregation. And they three came out. Stop right there. Look at the word suddenly. The Hebrew is pithom. It implies a violent, instant interruption. God does not wait for the sun to go down. He does not summon Moses to the peak of a mountain to discuss it. He strikes the camp with an immediate, unavoidable divine subpoena. Picture it. The million Israelites outside have no idea what was whispered in the privacy of the leader's tent, but they see the result. The three most powerful figures in the nation emerge from the camp and begin a silent, terrifying walk toward the sanctuary. Then, the sky drops. Numbers 12-5 reads, And the Lord came down in the pillar of the cloud, and stood in the door of the tabernacle, and called Aaron and Miriam. And they both came forth. Watch what the text does. The cloud does not just hover high over the Holy of Holies. It physically drops to the very door of the tent of meeting. It blocks the exit. And then a horrific separation occurs. The voice from the pillar calls the high priest and the prophetess to step forward, severing them from their younger brother. Moses stays back. The two rebels are isolated in the divine crosshairs. Same family, divided ground. The ancient Aramaic paraphrase, Targum Pseudo-Jonathan, preserves a chilling detail about this specific descent of the pillar. It records that the cloud did not come down, accompanied by the usual ministering angels of mercy, but with a terrifying vanguard of angels of strict, unyielding judgment. I offer it as that, one tradition's record. But the canonical text confirms the absolute severity of the atmosphere. God is holding court. He addresses their claim of equality directly. Speaking to the two siblings trembling at the door, he lays out the stark hierarchy of the prophetic realm. The King James records his words in verses 7 and 8. My servant Moses is not so, who is faithful in all mine house. With him will I speak mouth to mouth, even apparently, and not in dark speeches. And the similitude of the Lord shall he behold. Read that again. Miriam demanded equal footing. She asked, Hath he not spoken also by us? God's response is a devastating reversal. He does not just deny her equality. He elevates Moses to a realm no human has ever occupied. Ordinary prophets get dreams and riddles. Moses gets the face-to-face reality of the Creator. Moses is the custodian of the house. Then comes the final, lethal question from the cloud. Wherefore then were ye not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? The question hangs in the air. There is no answer recorded from Aaron. There is no defense recorded from Miriam. There is only the blinding presence of the pillar of fire and cloud, boiling with sudden wrath at the door of the tabernacle. God has finished speaking, but the terrifying climax of his judgment has not yet fallen. The cloud is preparing to lift, and when the smoke clears, only one sibling will be broken by the curse. Why does the high priest escape the wrath that physically consumes his sister? The pillar of cloud abruptly retracts from the door of the tabernacle. The immense heat and pressure of the divine presence lifts off the desert floor, vanishing back into the sky. The silence that follows in the courtyard is absolute. Numbers 12 to 9 and 10 record the fallout with terrifying speed in the King James Version. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. And the cloud departed from off the tabernacle, and, behold, Miriam became leprous, white as snow. Stop right there. Read that again. The anger of the Lord was kindled against them, plural. The text is explicit that the wrath was aimed at both siblings. But when the dust settles, the physical devastation is entirely asymmetrical. Only one of them is unmade. Miriam is standing there, her skin violently transformed into the color of dead, flaking bone. Aaron stands right next to her, completely untouched. One crime, two judgments. Why does the high priest escape the leprosy? We already saw the grammatical clue in the first verse. Miriam initiated the strike. She was the architect. But there is a massive, structural reason Aaron's skin remains clean, hidden in the very architecture of the camp. Picture it. Aaron is the anointed high priest of Israel. The sacred oil has been poured over his head. If the flesh-eating scale of leprosy touches even an inch of his body, he is instantly defiled. He would be permanently disqualified from entering the sanctuary. The entire sacrificial system of the camp, the daily offerings, the blood of atonement, the survival of the million Israelites waiting outside would violently collapse. The nation cannot survive without a functioning high priest. Same family, different collateral. God spares Aaron's flesh to save the nation. But Aaron does not escape punishment. His judgment is a different kind of terror. The King James finishes verse 10 with a gut-wrenching pivot. And Aaron looked upon Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. Watch what the text does. It forces Aaron to stare at the physical manifestation of his own treason, worn on the body of his older sister, and the horror is layered with profound legal weight. Go back to Leviticus chapter 13. The law explicitly tasks the priesthood with one specific, terrifying medical duty: identifying and managing leprosy. Only a priest can officially examine the white scale. Only a priest can pronounce the victim unclean. Only a priest can order the exile across the boundary line. Aaron is not just a brother watching his sister suffer. He is the supreme religious authority, legally required to look at her rotting flesh, diagnose the divine plague, and pronounce the exact words that will banish her to the wasteland. He has to condemn his own blood. The ancient Aramaic paraphrase, Targum Pseudo-Jonathan, captures the devastating reality of this moment. It suggests Aaron briefly experienced the leprosy himself, just long enough to feel the terror, before it was instantly removed from him and left permanently on Miriam. I offer it as that, one tradition's record. But even in the canonical text, the psychological weight is crushing. He knows he is just as guilty as the woman turning to chalk in front of him. Aaron is standing next to a half-dead woman, holding the weight of a guilty verdict he fully shares. The high priest cannot run to the altar, and he cannot hide behind his sacred garments. What does a broken priest say to the younger brother he just tried to overthrow? Aaron breaks. The high priest of Israel, draped in the holy garments of the sanctuary, turns his back on his sister's decaying skin and throws himself at the mercy of the younger brother he just tried to unseat. The King James Version records the total collapse of his pride in verse 11. And Aaron said unto Moses, Alas, my Lord, I beseech thee, lay not the sin upon us, wherein we have done foolishly and wherein we have sinned. Stop right there. Look at the title he uses, my Lord. Hours ago, inside the goat hair tent, Aaron was demanding equal footing. He and Miriam were challenging Moses' absolute authority, leaning on their status as the older siblings. Now, the hierarchy is permanently settled. Aaron does not call him brother, he calls him Lord. The high priest is begging, and his terror peaks in the very next verse. Aaron describes the leprosy crawling across Miriam's body with a horrific, visceral image. Let her not be as one dead, of whom the flesh is half consumed when he cometh out of his mother's womb. Picture it. Aaron is describing a stillborn infant. The disease is acting so violently, so rapidly, that Miriam looks like a corpse that never had the chance to live. This is the flesh-eating reality of the curse. Moses does not hesitate. He does not demand an apology. He does not remind them of the Cushite woman. He turns immediately toward the sky, toward the cloud that has just withdrawn, and he screams for her life. Numbers 12:13 captures the cry. And Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, Heal her now, O God, I beseech thee. Read that again. It is a desperate, frantic plea. But to feel the true velocity of Moses' terror, you have to read it in the original Hebrew. In the canonical text, this prayer is not a structured, eloquent petition. It is exactly 5 words. El nare fanala. God, please, heal, please, her. Sit with that. The man who wrote the sweeping, majestic poetry of Psalm 90, the man who delivered the intricate, soaring laws of Deuteronomy, abandons all eloquence. The Hebrew is jagged. It is a violent, breathless stutter of a prayer. The ancient rabbis noted this extreme brevity and recorded a tradition in the Midrash. They wrote that Moses deliberately kept the prayer to 5 words. So the Israelites watching the sanctuary would not whisper that he was taking his time, praying long, eloquent prayers, while his sister suffered the agony of the curse. I hold this as their telling, not as proven fact. But the canonical Hebrew text undeniably preserves the panic. El na refa nala. Moses is holding the broken pieces of his family in the courtyard, screaming at the sky to reverse the judgment. He is leveraging all of his unmatched favor with the Creator to save the woman who saved him at the Nile. He expects immediate mercy, but the voice that answers him from the heavens does not offer comfort. It offers a terrifying, violent image of a father's disgust, and it demands the prophetess be thrown into the wasteland. How does God answer the 5-word prayer of his most faithful servant? The sky does not soften. The cloud does not immediately reverse the leprosy. Instead, the voice of God cuts through Moses' desperate 5-word prayer with an image of absolute, visceral disgust. The King James Version records the shock of verse 14. And the Lord said unto Moses, If her father had but spit in her face, should she not be ashamed 7 days? Let her be shut out from the camp 7 days, and after that let her be received in again. Stop right there. Look at the violence of that comparison. God does not compare Miriam's treason to a political coup. He does not compare it to a military rebellion. He compares it to a daughter deeply shaming her family, and a patriarch reacting with the ultimate physical gesture of ancient Near Eastern contempt. Picture it. A father spitting directly into the face of his own daughter. It is an image designed to make the listener flinch. In the ancient Hebrew world, to be spat upon by the patriarch was not just an emotional insult. It was a formal, devastating curse of isolation. It meant the daughter had committed an act so vile, so thoroughly disgraceful, that her mere presence infected the household. Same family, shattered honor. If an earthly father's spit demands a 7-day banishment for the shame to dissipate, how much more the wrath of the divine? God grants Moses the healing, but he utterly refuses the immediate restoration. The flesh-eating scale will stop, but the penalty of shame must be paid in full. There is no shortcut around the boundary line. Not for the prophetess, not for the sister of the deliverer. She must be shut out. This is where the physical geography of the camp becomes a weapon. The million Israelites are meticulously arranged around the presence of God. The further out you walk, the further you are from the fire, the manna, and the blood of the altar. Past the final row of tents, there is only the wilderness of Hazeroth, scorpions, vipers, the howling, chaotic dark. Leviticus chapter 13 dictates that a leper must dwell alone. Without the camp shall her habitation be. The 7-day isolation is not an arbitrary number. It is the absolute minimum, legal quarantine for the unclean before a priest can even re-examine the skin. But this is more than medical quarantine. It is a spiritual exile. Watch what the text does. The King James uses the phrase, shut out. The Hebrew implies a hard locking of a door, a definitive severance from the covenant community. Aaron, the high priest who stood beside her in the rebellion, must watch her walk away. Moses, the commander who screamed for her life, cannot cross the boundary to protect her. She steps over the line, a solitary figure cast into the wasteland, bearing the divine shame. The law of the wilderness is ruthless, dictating that the pillar of cloud controls the march, and a million people wait for no single exile. But as the sun sets on Miriam's first day of banishment, the immense machinery of the Exodus suddenly locks its gears. Why does an entire nation refuse to take a single step away from a woman the Creator just exiled? Go back now to the wilderness where this film began. Miriam is sitting in the dust, past the final row of tents. The boundary line is drawn. The leprosy has been halted by Moses' 5-word prayer, but the shame of the father's spit remains. She is entirely alone in the wasteland. But look back at the camp. Numbers 12:15 records a profound, breathtaking silence in the King James Version. And Miriam was shut out from the camp 7 days, and the people journeyed not till Miriam was brought in again. Stop right there. Read that again. The people journeyed not. The immense, unstoppable machinery of the Exodus comes to a dead halt. This is a nation of over 1 million people. They operate on a strict divine schedule dictated by the pillar of fire and cloud. When the cloud lifts, they must march. When it settles, they camp. God just violently judged Miriam and ordered her exile. By all wilderness logic, the cloud should lift and move the nation forward, leaving the rebel behind to catch up when her 7 days of shame are finished. That is how armies march. The broken are left to the rear, but the cloud does not lift. The Creator who exiled her refuses to abandon her. The pillar of glory anchors itself to the tabernacle and simply waits. And because the cloud waits, Moses waits, Aaron waits. The massive tribes of Judah and Dan lay down their banners. 1 million Israelites sit in the blistering heat of Hazeroth for a full week, refusing to pack a single tent, refusing to take a single step toward the promised land. Why? The ancient rabbis saw a devastating, beautiful symmetry here. They taught that the universe pays its debts. 80 years earlier, a Hebrew mother placed a baby in an ark of bulrushes and set him in the reeds of the Nile River. Exodus 2-4 says, "And his sister stood afar off, to wit what would be done to him. She did not leave him. She stood at a distance, outside the boundary of the water, watching over the deliverer when he was helpless." Now, the roles are perfectly reversed. The deliverer is inside the camp. The sister is outside the boundary, helpless in the dirt, and 1 million people stand afar off, watching over her. She waited for him. Now, they wait for her. Same devotion, same silence. This is one reading, not the final word. But the canonical text undeniably forces the entire Exodus to bow to her exile. Her judgment is absolute, but so is her value. The camp cannot move without its prophetess. We know she crosses back over the line on the 8th day. The flesh is restored. The shame is lifted. The camp finally marches forward. But what actually happened to her mind out there in the dark, during those 7 nights alone with the wolves and the wind? What did the prophetess say to the God who struck her white as snow and then stood completely still until she was healed? The canonical text never tells us. It gives us her exile, and it gives us her return. But the desert is still holding the rest. If you saw the symmetry at the boundary line, comment the word "watched" below. Subscribe to this channel, because the wilderness is full of texts we have stopped reading closely, and send this to one person who loves the deep architecture of the Bible, but has never heard the true story of Moses' Cushite bride. Sometimes the harshest exile is just the prerequisite for the deepest restoration.